I'm going to talk about the social value and cost of flexible demand. In fact, it's the word in brackets that's a really important one here, because without that word in brackets, that's roughly what I did 10 years ago, and I could have given you to the nearest £1 billion the exact cost and value of flexible demand, and that's exactly why I wanted to add the social in brackets into this topic. Because what commonly happens in the models that we have from the National Infrastructure Commission, Grant Strobach's work, is that we get very precise cost estimations for flexibility, but actually with a heap of assumptions in there. And one of the really big assumptions is how demand could be made flexible. My favorite assumption among them is that it would be free, and clearly that can't be quite right. So I want to address, we were told to pick out two interesting questions. That's exactly what I anticipated to do. So I want to address the first question: what is peak demand? And by that, I don't mean a definition in the sort of maximum kilowatt hours, but actually unpicking what goes on when people create peak demand. And then, secondly, what happens when we try to change it? Obviously, I can't stick to two. There's a third one that cropped up, and I'll explain how that came about. So that's your bonus takeaway for today. So what we're doing to find out what people actually do with electricity, the initial and very popular approach is to look at time use data, which is collected with these diaries that thousands of people fill in. For every 10 minutes they enter what they're doing, and then you can try to relate those activities to sort of societal patterns, where you can see when people eat, when they sleep, and all these sort of things. And we thought, rather than speculating how these patterns relate to electricity use, it would be quite nice to pin that down explicitly. So we've developed this paper-based approach into an app that allows people to make very simple entries about their daily activities, and at the same time we'll equip them with an electricity recorder. So while they're telling us what they're doing, we can see how much electricity they use, and then hopefully we can draw a comparison between the activities and electricity use. We have the data in aggregated form, but of course it's very difficult to link the two together, so doing it explicitly is quite helpful. One thing I should draw your attention to, the rightmost column in this sample here is a question about how much do you enjoy this activity. That was added to the last round of time use surveys, and the people who conduct these studies told me it was the first time ever that they introduced an extra question to the questionnaire, and the retention rate didn't go down, but up. So people like being asked if they enjoy what they're doing, which I very opportunistically just adopted and included the question. But it's actually such a fascinating topic that this led me to the third question: how's our enjoyment affected when we try to change demand? Right, as a first verification of this approach that we're doing and what people tell us has actually anything to do with electricity use, I want to show you some solid statistical validation, namely the T-test. The British are absolutely fantastic at drinking lots of tea, but they're also fantastic at reporting it. And tea is great because the kettle has such a wonderfully recognizable spike. So we can go through the electricity data, find the kettle spikes, go through the activity data, find all the cups of tea that have been reported, and then look at the temporal discrepancy between them. And as you can see here, it's good to plus minus 5 minutes in most cases. So well done, the British public. So with this T-test validation, I want to show you what actually happens at peak demand. So we can now sort of trawl through all the activities, and I should probably stress this is not, we're sort of developing methods to untangle this a bit, but in the first instance it's a very simple attribution between people report an activity and then we look at what is the electricity use at the time. Of course, very often these overlap and you can try to untangle that again, but that is actually quite a challenging AI problem that we're still working on. But in the first instance, you can already get a sense for the sort of things that go on. So the width of the bars is how frequently these things are reported. The line in the middle is the median electricity consumption. The size of these bars gives you a sense of how varied it is. I mean, we're talking about huge distributions in every case here. We also still have a category in here, custom definition. We try to avoid people having to type in by hand what they're doing, but some people are very eager to do that. In fact, quite a lot of people give us very detailed accounts. We need to untangle that a bit. But you can immediately see some very prominent activities here. I mean, we've got the oven, the hot meal, cooking on hob. So food clearly features quite strongly in this. So we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, what does food mean for energy and what sort of profiles are there. And I now need to eat my own words because in the past I've often been very rude about clustering. I'm sometimes a bit concerned that we just cluster willy-nilly things together. So colleagues of mine have clustered these data, and I'm delighted to say, apparently, and on very solid statistical grounds, there's only two types of peak demand. One that goes up and one that goes down. That's what they have concluded based on the data. And which membership of cluster you have, the outstanding predictor is the hot meal. So hot meals really seem to be quite central in deciding when our demand peaks. And that's very interesting, and I hope to follow that up further. But then, of course, the secondary step was what happens when we try to change that. Now, there's a lot of studies out there that give our price signals or rewards of that nature. We've done a smallish subsample of our participants with a very simple brief, just a note that they get as part of the equipment that says, try to use less electricity between 5 and 7, as simple as that. And the response was very positive. I should caveat this by saying these are highly engaged people. They are not representative of the general population. So they managed 16% reduction between these hours. But that's not, as I said, the number I'm interested in. I'm interested to see how did they do it? What actually happened? What did they do? What did they not do? What did they do instead? And the first thing that we observed, and that sort of actually confirms a lot of the sort of automatable context, is the washing machine is definitely one of those flexible things. So here's the period, the 2 hours before the 5 to 7, the 5 to 7 period, and then what happens after. And the green bars are what happened in the normal situation. So people would use washing machines before 5 to 7 and a little bit during 5 to 7. On the intervention day, that got completely shifted. So the use before was dramatically reduced, during was completely avoided, and then people shifted to later. So they avoided and delayed the use of their washing machine. Sorry?
And increased overall.
Yes, isn't that striking? Well, don't read too much into it. I mean, as I said, small sample, and these are indicative results. I wouldn't bank too much on this. I do want to collect more of these data, and obviously also with different type of groups. But the other one that was such a strong predictor was hot meals. So what happens to hot meals? So again, the green bars, very few hot meals before 5 to 7, and increasingly more between, and mostly after 5 to 7. But what you can see with the orange bar, so the hot meals between 5 to 7 have been reduced, and in this case, even after 5 to 7, because obviously the energy consumption is with the meal preparation rather than the meal itself. So even after the 5 to 7 period, people would have fewer hot meals. How do people cope? What do they do instead of having a hot meal?
Shower takeaway. Sandwich.
Takeaway would be very sensible. Well, a lot of them seem to have adopted a snack. So again, in the period, a few more snacks. But even more amusingly and far more dramatic, and we're talking about the great British people here, remember what they do so well? They do it even better when asked to reduce demand. So we've got an almost tripling of hot tea reporting in this period of stress. So it's a very good coping mechanism. But of course, this will affect people in many ways, and this is where I wanted to just briefly share with you some of those findings about enjoyment. So for every activity that people report, they tell us how much they enjoy it. So if you're interested in improving the enjoyment of your life, here is the top 12s of worst and best things you can do. So 1, 2, and 3 is socializing, reading, eating hot meals actually is very good for you, at least in terms of enjoyment. It goes all the way down to gardening, so lots of lovely things. And then on the right side, you can see all the things to avoid, or well, you probably still have to do them, but clearing out, washing dishes, all these sort of household chores. Very in the dark grade for us is commuting, traveling to work is among the least enjoyed activities of all. And Joanne, is she here? No, she asked me earlier. Joanne said, what I'd like to see is a graph of sort of enjoyment versus electricity use. And I'm pleased to say that's exactly what I've got for you. So here it is, left to right enjoyment, from left least enjoyable, right most enjoyable, bottom low consumption, top high consumption, and off the chart in the sort of unenjoyable high consumption corner you've got the washing machine, washing dishes, all these sort of chores. And then we've got this happy frontier here of things that are lovely, like reading, socialising, sleeping. I'm never quite sure why people enjoy sleeping so much, but that's how they report it. And these things, not only are they very enjoyable, they're relatively low in energy use, so we could try to encourage more reading, sleeping, and socialising as a good thing to do. So in conclusion, what is peak demand? I mean, it's a lot of things. And one of the reasons I want to continue collecting more and more data is to actually understand the diversity in these patterns. So surely you'll agree with me, there must be more than two types of peak demand, but it needs more data and more discrimination to untangle those. But we've clearly identified, even from the limited data we've got so far, is that hot meals are indeed quite a central part. It's not just the hot meal in itself, it's what the hot meal brings with it. So, a hot meal brings the family together, so the house will be highly occupied, people will be doing other things alongside the meal preparation. So this whole activity complex of hot meals is worth understanding in more detail. What happens when we try to change demand? Again, all sorts of dynamics, and it's not just that people just do less, they will do other things instead, and it's worth understanding what they do and also what gets in the way of them potentially avoiding things, because there's some things that you just cannot avoid. I mean, ultimately you have to eat, and other things as well. But there's an interesting thing going on. There's some shifting going on. There's some substitution going on. So lots of dynamics that we can try to drill into a little bit more. And then in terms of enjoyment, when I first put this abstract in, I thought I had a very simple narrative that showed that when we ask people to reduce demand, the enjoyment goes down. But on further investigation, it turned out that was not the case. And that's in part because these cups of tea are so enjoyable. And the way we measure enjoyment, the enjoyment of a hot meal counts as much as the enjoyment of a cup of tea. If they're really the same, it's probably not a fair evaluation. But basically, again, lots of things go in different directions. Avoiding the washing machine clearly avoids unenjoyable things. Having more cups of tea brings in enjoyment. So again, we're hoping to understand this whole complex a little bit better, to then hopefully come up with socially acceptable ways to be more flexible. And that's all I wanted to share with you today. Leaves me to thank these lovely people who helped me with the whole tool development and analysis. And here is UKERC, always friendly and supportive in helping us conduct this study. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So are there any points of clarification only? Yep, Keith?
Just wondered, Phil, whether you use some of these methods for kind of the non-intrusive disaggregation of the electricity demand. You can automatically extract when the kettle's going on the microwave. It looked like you might have done. You have.
Look, you can spot all sorts of things. In fact, I mean, we're hoping to do a bit more of that with sort of live feedback, where we could. Sorry, this is going to be too long an answer, but yes is the answer. Very interesting patterns, both on appliances, but also you can sort of find patterns for activities. So what does going to bed look like across a population? What does getting home look like? So you get sort of standard patterns for those. So yes, lots of learning to be done.